Everything's always upside down, isn't it? YouTube friends, what is going on? David Lee back, brand a new video. Today we are talking about the Sony FS7. Should you buy it in 2020? What are your production needs? And should you choose the Sony FX6 or the Sony FX9 instead? Now, two very interesting cameras, right? The FX9 and the FX6. The FX9 has been out for about a year now. The FX6 just came out and it looks to be pretty much like a Sony a7 III in a pro body, right? There are pros and cons to that, as well as pros and cons to choosing, say, the Sony FS7 in 2020 over an FX6 or an FX9. Today, I wanted to break down as many of the questions I've been receiving as far as, which camera should I get for my needs? Should I get the FX6, the FX9, or the FS7? Now let's start with the FX9 and the FX6. If you are in the market to purchase a camera for run and gun, for documentary, for corporate work, also something that can tick boxes, say for music videos or for narrative films, then the FX6, the FX9, and the FS7 can kind of fit all of those needs for you. Now, speaking of the FX6 and the FX9, they're pretty much the new kids on the block, so to speak, right? The FX9 has been out for about a year. The FX6 just came out. Can the FS7, that is, almost, I think it's almost like 6 years old now, can it still compete in today's 4K camera world, right? And even 6K camera world with like the Komodo, the Blackmagic 6K, the Z cams, and all those different camera systems, right? Now the FS7 can compete. It's been going on for so long now where, 6 years, you see the FS7 on reality doc and reality TV, you see it in full-time documentary work, you see it in corporate work, you see it in music festivals, right? Well, probably pre-COVID, but you see it in music festivals. And the FS7 laid the groundwork for the image quality for the FX9 and the FX6, right? So you're not losing, as far as image quality goes, you're not losing anything by purchasing a used FS7. And then to piggyback off that, I guess, the obvious question is, should you get the FX9 or the FX6? Well, let's talk about price, right? The FS7, you can probably get a used one for anywhere between $3,000 and $4,000, maybe a little bit higher or a little bit lower. It kind of depends on what the camera comes with, what the package comes with, how many hours on it, etc. So if you compare that, $3,000 to $4,000 to, say, a brand new FX6, which costs $6,000, you might be asking yourself, well, what am I getting if I'm paying an extra $2,000 to $3,000 with the FX6? Well, you're getting 4K 120 if that is an absolute necessity for you. You are getting a lower base ISO when shooting in S-Log2 and S-Log3 on the FX6 and the FX9. It is 800 ISO for the S-Log profiles. On the FS7, you're stuck at ISO 2000 when you're shooting in Cine EI mode. Now, high frame rates, the FX6 goes up to 240 frames per second in full HD. The FS7 only goes up to 180 frames per second in full HD. Now you have to pick and choose exactly if 240 frames per second in HD and 4K 120 are absolute necessities for your types of shoots. Again, with the FS7, 180 frames per second is still really good. I've never gone past 180 frames per second, but if I had 240, I might use it if it was good quality. So we're gonna have to see exactly how the 240 frames per second stacks up to the 180 in the FX9 and also in the FS7. The FX6 is also much smaller. It's about half the size of the FX9 and also the FS7. So if you want something that's more mobile, something that you can shoot handheld for longer, something you can put on gimbals easily compared to like an FS7 or an FX9, then the FX6 might be the camera for you. The one quirk about the FX6 is the dual XLR ports are on the top panel itself, whereas the FS7 and the FX9, the dual XLR ports are on the body itself. So that may be something that you need to consider as well for audio purposes. We all want to have the cleanest audio as possible, and using XLRs, again, as a more professional, as a more solid option than, say, like 3.5mm. Not to say you can't get away with 3.5mm. I use it all the time, but XLRs on the body itself can save you much more headaches down the road than having to like jerry rig things onto your small camera body system. As far as the FS7 versus the FX9, they're pretty much two different cameras, right? Whereas with the FS7 is a native Super 35mm sensor, the FX9 is a native full frame sensor. But the FX9 can go into Super 35 mode. So, say if you're renting Super 35mm glass, you're covered there. On the FS7, you can get the full frame look by using a speed booster. So you kind of have to pick and choose which one you want. It's nice when you can just have full frame and then go into Super 35, right? Whereas with the FS7, in order for you to go full frame, you need a speed booster. That's one extra thing you need in front of the sensor, one extra thing you need to bring on set with you. Image quality, you know, from what I've seen, the FX9 is really good, but the FS7 is also really good, right? You'd have to really nitpick things when it comes to image quality. That 6K or that oversampled 4K image from a 6K sensor versus a native 4K on the FS7 is debatable, very, very debatable. Color science, I would probably say that the FX9 wins in that category just because they've taken the color science from the Sony Venice and brought that into the FX9, FX6, and I think for the most part, the Sony A7S Mark III, right? So the FS7 really is built for people who either just want a straight Rec 709 look, or you really have to know color grading if you're using S-Log2, S-Log3 in Cine EI. Now kind of circling back to codecs, the FX6 is the only camera between the FS7 and the FX9 that doesn't have a wider variety of codecs, right? You have the all-eye, which is great, but you don't have like the long op, the lower, or yeah, I guess like the lower quality versions for your recording codecs, right? Now, low light is also a topic for many of us, right? We need a camera that can do pretty well or decent in low light conditions. Now, the FS7 does really well even at in Cine EI at ISO 2000. You can take a look at a short film that I DP'd earlier or middle of this year called Prowler. It was all night exterior. And the whole thing was night exteriors, right? Shooting at ISO 2000 S-Log2 Cine EI on the FS7. We did use fast glass, which helps because again, you can get more light onto the sensor. But the advantage to the FX6 and the FX9 is they have like their dual native ISOs. I believe the FX6 doesn't, you know, technically have a dual native ISO, but when you switch to ISO 12800, it's almost like the circuitry switches to a higher native ISO. The FX9 has that dual native ISO of 4800. So you're probably getting cleaner images overall, but again, you kind of have to ask yourself, you know, would I ever be in a situation where I need 12800 ISO? Maybe you do, right? Maybe you're a wedding filmmaker. Hopefully, you know, once everything blows away, then you can get back to filming weddings. Or maybe you really are like a photojournalist. You're going into situations, documentary scenarios where you don't have any light. So you need to have as much light onto the sensor as possible. For me, I don't shoot, you know, too much running gun these days. There are times where I do. But the FS7 has surprised me very much with ISO 2000. You can, you know, push and pull the image ever so slightly in low light situations, but it's a clean image out the gate where you don't need barely any noise reduction, right? Unless, again, you're shooting something extremely just dark, right? There is no light coming in, then I think any camera would suffer at that point. So all in all, does it make sense for you to buy a used Sony FS7, right? Well, as we talked about today, the image quality is pretty much the same, right? Minus color science. I think color science is something a little bit different, it's a different category. But everything that I have shot with on the FS7, everything that I have seen on the FS7, right? You can take a look at Mark Bone, his YouTube channel, his Vimeo channel, all the docs he shot, the commercials he shot, a lot of them have been on the Sony FS7, right? And it looks really good. The stuff that I've shot this year, I've been surprised with the color renditions, with the image quality. It's a super clean sensor, right? It's really hard to say that about a lot of sensors unless you're going into like that higher level camera range. So I've been very surprised and very, very pleased by how clean the image is, how fast I'm able to work with the FS7 from built-in NDs to built-in XLRs, right? So the only things that you're getting, say, from the FX6 compared to a used FS7, you're getting a smaller body that has to fit your needs. If you absolutely need a smaller body, you're getting 4K 120, you're getting HD 240. Again, you have to there has to be a necessity for the camera. If you don't need 4K 120, if you don't need HD 240, they're very niche resolutions, right, and frame rates. So if you absolutely don't need that, I would say save an extra $2,000 to $3,000, get a used FS7, and then spend that extra money, say, on glass. Maybe you need a better monitor, like a 7-inch monitor, maybe you need some better audio equipment, maybe you need some better lighting equipment or grip equipment, right? You could always use that extra money that you're saving to help the production level go up even higher. Now, how about the FX9, right? Should you get an FX9, spend the extra, $6,000 to $7,000 on the FX9? I think if you've been shooting on the FS7 for a couple of years, and it makes sense to upgrade to the FX9 in 2020 or in 2021, there still are plenty, and believe me, there's still plenty of jobs that are requiring and are asking for the FS7 just because it's been battle tested for 6 years, right? Productions know, they know the camera is reliable. They post houses know how to grade S-Log2 and S-Log3, right? So the FS7 isn't going anywhere for at least for another 2-3 years, in my opinion. The FX9 will slowly start to take away, we'll start to like replace the FS7 jobs over time, right? Alrighty friends, that does it for me. If you have any more questions on the FS7, should you get it in 2020, moving into 2021, leave a comment down below so that way everyone can see it, everyone can add their comments, and you can have this like participation engagement with our community. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe to my YouTube channel as always, just so you're notified of new content coming out. And remember friends, every day you have an opportunity to create your experience and to write and tell your own story. My name is David Lee, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.